in the office right now because I decided to hang back and continue to unpack my house. But in the meantime, we're ready to go. I may not have unpacked, but I've definitely packed a bowl. So let's get into it and let's jump into the rotation.
I get it because bull pack.
I think you just put that thing on just to cut me off. You know that?
I didn't cut you off this time.
Yeah,
I even said something before I put it on.
Nice.
Did I
I
cut
was
you off?
getting ready to say bowl.
What'd you say?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say bowl pack, but we're not going to get into that. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Here we are on a beautiful Sunday, the day before 9/11, which is not a national holiday yet, although I can't imagine calling it a holiday. But anyways, we are ready to go, and let's get into what is going on in Washington, D.C. But let's start out by introducing ourselves. I am Gary Stein, the political director and the member of the Master of Public Health here at Strekal NORML. That's my sound? It sounded kind of squishy. And my lower right, we have Carlos Angel Armida, our deputy director of National Administration. And to my right, at your left, I think, we have our executive director coming to us from beautiful Anne Arundel County, where he is above the Beltway, but hits him below the Beltway. Our executive director, once again, ladies and gentlemen, Carlos Chris Cano. Yay. And speaking of Washington, D.C., where everything happens and nothing happens. In our lower right-hand, left-hand corner, the former director of public policy for National NORML, and now the head of his own political action committee, Bull Pack, as we were trying to introduce him before, Justin Strekal. Justin, how are you doing over there, over in beautiful DC today?
I'm doing great, and it has been a very intense couple of weeks, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it.
Now I'm so used to nothing happening in DC. I mean, it has been. If you go to Congress.com and you put in the keywords for marijuana or cannabis or both together, and you'll find that there are close to 200 bills that have come out since 1971, since the Controlled Substance Act. And how many of those have actually passed?
Well, passed is a relative thing. How many have passed all of Congress? One. Two, if you count the Farm Bill. There's a medical bill that was passed at the end of 2020, but we've now had the Safe Banking Act pass over a dozen times in the House of Representatives, and we've had the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or the MORE Act, pass the U.S. House of Representatives twice.
So we actually got them passed. We haven't gotten past the Senate. We've got House passed.
Yeah. And
therefore, it has never actually gotten enrobed and sent over to the Resolute desk.
Correct. Just the medical research bill in 2022, which ironically enough, at this stage in the game, and we'll talk more about it in a few minutes, it loosened research restrictions for marijuana in Schedule 1, but should the administration actually reschedule to Schedule 3, it's tighter research restrictions than it would be under Schedule 3. So wow. if the best of intentions, right?
That's what you call the legislator cha-cha-cha. One step forward, two steps back, right?
Yeah. No, so it's wild times. I think that, I like to refer to the comprehensive effort as preparing for the end game. And I think we've done a hell of a lot to advance our readiness for the end game, educating lawmakers as to some of the basic tenets. I mean, the MORE Act, when it passed in the House twice, it had provisions to explicitly protect things like home cultivation, which just a decade ago, or just over a decade ago, when Washington State first passed, they maintained criminalization. And as recently as 2 years ago, when New Jersey passed their law, they still maintained the criminalization of home grow. So in a way, House Democrats are better than the state of New Jersey when it comes to home grow.
Now, just so people understand, the concept of preemption coming from the federal government, and when we're talking about, was it the 14th Amendment that gives states rights?
10th Amendment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Which one prevails when it comes to cannabis laws?
I mean, one of the things that I find both thrilling and horrifying when we're talking about marijuana policy in the U.S. and the federal state tension is that laws don't matter. Right now, every law that we have in effect in the 38 medical states or the 23 adult use states are all flagrantly defying federal prohibition and criminalization, and yet we're not seeing enforcement actions. And yet, one of the big fears that I in part hold is whether or not we see a rescheduling regime coming from the administration that's going to dramatically empower the FDA to come in and regulate the substance as a Schedule 3 substance. And if they followed the letter of the law, that would mean shutting down every single adult use and medical program.
So saying that there actually is medical use, which is their basis of the report, from taking it down from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, actually prevents anybody from being able to utilize it medically.
Because none of what we have created so far was designed to comport with a rescheduling regime. It was all done clear defiance of federal law, clear defiance of the Controlled Substances Act. And under the legal precedent that we have, this is why when a Florida patient goes in and speaks with their doctor, they don't receive a prescription, they receive a recommendation. And under Schedule 3, in order for an individual to not be viewed as a criminal by under federal law possessing that substance has to be approved by the FDA for sale as a Schedule 3 substance, which flower will never be. There's no way the botanical plants can get identically replicated in order to be approved as Schedule 3. And because it's a recommendation, not a prescription. So patients are still breaking the law in two different ways. And, the question that we have, and, a lot of people are out there right now when they're having this discussion selling certainty. I'm out here selling doubt because we don't know exactly what is going to unfold should we see this reclassification. And there's a lot of different potential parade of horribles that could happen that we as advocates and activists would hate. But we could see a continuation of this, what I like to refer to as the uneasy detente, where despite all the states being in defiance of federal law enforcement was just not taking action.
Now let's try to make a parallel, which is kind of tough, but it can still work in regards to the abortion laws. Now we got Roe versus Wade actually reversed this, as we know in that case, and that caused all the states to go ahead and start putting out their own laws to rearrange themselves. Is that the same thing that's going to happen here if it goes to Schedule 3, where we're going to have to rearrange all of our state laws and have each one of our legislators actually take action?
I mean, it all depends on what the FDA and the DEA and would choose to do under this new classification. Just for your viewers who might not be in the weeds here, I want to make sure that everyone understands what it is we're even talking about. So on August 30th, so just over a week and a half ago, Bloomberg News reported that an administrator for the Department of Health and Human Services, they didn't cite who, sent a letter to the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, to Administrator Ann Milgram, recommending an official reclassification of marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Now, mind you, this was a leaked letter to the reporter at Bloomberg. Nobody knows what's in that letter. I've had about a couple hundred congressional offices and other reporters and other advocates ask me if I've obtained a copy. I have not. So we don't know exactly what's in that letter and what they're citing as their justification for that recommendation. And now the ball is in the DEA's court, and it could take them, a lot of previous scheduling reviews for other substances take between 6 and 12 months. We could see an expedited review internally. There theoretically should be a public comment process as a part of this. That would be a 30-day window. But we are really in uncharted terrain here. So we don't know exactly what the DEA is going to be doing. And they absolutely are not showing their hand to reporters or activists or advocates. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Is it possible that they just don't do anything?
That is an entirely possible thing. We could see the DEA just sit on this for years. The last time something like this made it through the process and substantively got considered, we actually just had the anniversary of this a couple days ago, the 35th anniversary, I should say. That was the result of a petition that was initiated by NORML in the early 80s, and it took them years to consider this petition. And it was the result of tireless efforts of advocates and activists who continued pushing, continued demanding, day after day, month after month, continuing to beat that drum until they were finally responded to after years and years. So it's a really unglamorous role to be in and continue to just to have to pound that pavement. But I suspect, given the fact that this is something that the Biden administration has, as a candidate, he promised that he would decriminalize marijuana, and that now as president, he's actually been touting as one of his 12 biggest achievements in the first 2 years was the pardons that they issued last October 6th. So I think we have the political high ground right now, and the question is how are we as a movement going to be leveraging this? Because right now, under a rescheduling, the only 100% certain tangible benefit that we would see, it's not for people. It's for the companies that are currently state licensed for the state legal programs, because they would see 280E tax relief. But as far as how actual people are treated under the law, Schedule 3 does absolutely nothing for the average pot smoker.
But it does allow the pharmaceutical companies to start producing synthesized products from the plant and capitalize on that once they're approved by the FDA.
Gary, you hit the nail on the head of one of the parade of horribles that we could see, and what I think is the most likely of a catastrophic outcome, should we see a catastrophic outcome. We see there's Marinol, which is a synthetic medication that has FDA approval. There's Epidiolex, which is a extract that has been approved by the FDA. So if we do see a pharmaceutical company after a rescheduling put something in the hopper, botanical plants, just growing a plant, never going to be approved under Schedule 3. But with extracts, we could see something get approved, go through clinical trials, the whole 9 yards. And then should a pharmaceutical company get that FDA approval, then they are in a position where they have the full authority to take legal action on their own against anybody else who's selling a non-FDA approved cannabis product claiming that it has therapeutic benefits. So we don't need to just be worried about government enforcement agencies. If pharma comes in, then they could get something approved and sick their army of lawyers against every single medical cannabis company in the country.
This is like Kevin Sabet's wet dream.
It's going, the biggest winner here are the lawyers and pharma's lawyers. Under that parade of horribles, right? So I don't want to say that's going to happen, but that is something that could happen. And I don't want to recommend to pharma that they go down that route, but they don't need to hear it from me. I'm sure it's something they've been thinking about already.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure that they were just thrilled to start pushing Marinol.
Yeah.
And Marinol was the go-to thing that we had. We had medical necessity over here in Florida, where they would say, well, if we can't get you the plant, we can always get you a prescription for Marinol. And people had these anxiety attacks that they couldn't stop and everything else that was wrong with Marinol, because basically it's basically a race car without a steering wheel. by having the THC and having no terpenes to guide them, so to speak.
Yeah.
And Gary, if I could just add, you brought up abortion and how the fall of Roe triggered state actions. That's a result of most of the state actions that happened were one of two things. It was either A, codifying protections or expanding protections, or B, rescinding protections. The fall of Roe didn't itself change any laws, but it did have some states, like my home state of Ohio, that had trigger laws that were ready in place to take effect in the event of the fall of Roe. But in that opinion, the court wrote, I'm quoting here, attempts to justify abortion through appeals to the broader right to autonomy and to define one's, quote, concept of existence prove too much under KC 501 S 851. Those criteria at a high level of generality could license fundamental rights to illicit drug use, prostitution, and the like. So even the Supreme Court argued that permitting abortion under a privacy legal framework is connected to illicit drug use. So our movements are intersected when so often we as drug policy reformers push the narrative of it's our personal right, it's our personal privacy, the government has nothing to do with it. So the fall of Roe, if anything, really took away one of our strongest legal precedents that we can claim, which is the right to privacy.
I've always said that releasing Roe will create a rabbit hole that people are not going to want to go down on. Number one, because the Republicans for many, many years actually campaigned on being pro-life, and having that taken away from them actually takes away a tool from their own tool basket to win elections.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, let me kind of, for the folks just tuning in, sum up, everything that we've been talking about thus far. The Biden administration is the first presidential administration since Nixon, push for the Controlled Substances Act to actually start the examination and rescheduling process. The Trump had 4 years to do it. He didn't do it. Obama had 8. Bush had 8. Clinton had 8. All pot smokers, with the exception of Trump that we know about. But Trump did a lot of partying in the 80s. I'm pretty sure he either puffed a joint or hit a nose beers at some point. Point being is that Schedule 3, which is the HHS's plan for marijuana rescheduling, they have a different testing approach than the DEA. The DEA has like a 5-point prong test for rescheduling. And that's one of the reasons why, we haven't been able to get this modern DEA to do anything. You talked previously about, there was it's been 35 years since a DEA chief administrative law judge actually determined that cannabis does possess medical utility in the United States, and therefore it ought to be available to qualified patients. That ruling was issued September 6, 1988, but the Judge Francis Young's ruling was in response to an administrative petition that NORML filed back when we were founded, essentially in 1972, just 2 years after NORML had actually been filed. So our first major thing was to challenge this as an organization, and it took them from 72 all the way to 88 to get an actual ruling, and it's been 35 years. Now I want to read and quote that. This is the exact quote from Judge Francis Young. Marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. By any measure of rational analysis, marijuana can be safely used within a supervised routine of medical care. It would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious for DEA to continue to stand between those sufferers and the benefits of this substance in light of the evidence of this record.
And that falls right after the Schaefer report, which came out in 71.
So for 35 years, our federal bureaucracy has targeted and infringed on our civil rights. And this goes much bigger, like you said, because it intersects. It's the nature of policing in this country that is a major issue. It's the fact that people are being fleeced. And now, as you said, the lawyers are coming in, seeing dollar signs, and the pharmaceutical companies and big tobacco, big alcohol, all the people who always wanted to keep marijuana illegal are doing everything they can that if it does become legal, they want to corner the market. And so you have a lot of advocates right now who don't know their heads from their asses, over the past week, taking the television and taking the podcasts and shows all over the place. I'm glad we have you on, because plain and simple, what you said today is that Schedule 3 will not yield the results that most people enjoy about our state systems right now. Flour, concentrates, topicals, edibles, RSO, distillate, and any other method of ingestion all go bye-bye under Schedule 3, and only the pharmaceutical companies that can pass FDA approval will be the ones that essentially will be able to sell cannabis. Now, here's the messed up part, folks, for those of you listening, is that there's no precedent for having Health and Human Services recommend a substance to be classified as Schedule 3 that first has not gone through phase 3 trials and a formal FDA review. And as you said, Justin, the FDA will not approve common cannabis methods of ingestion like smoking flower, because you can't reproduce the exact results. That's why the FDA wants to put everything in a pill. They don't approve herbal medicines. And there's no precedent for the federal government classifying a substance as a conventional medicine, but simultaneously allowing states to regulate it like an intoxicant. That's not going to work. So there is no viable solution to a future where the civil rights of Americans are not infringed upon for using cannabis, other than complete descheduling and at best regulating this like an agricultural commodity. Am I correct?
Yes, for the most part. I wouldn't use such strong rhetoric in saying it all go, like everything that we know, concentrates, resins, distillate, etc., goes away, because it will only go away should we see concerted federal enforcement efforts right away, or at some point after a reclassification, or if we see reclassification, a big pharma player getting something approved, and then they have standing to take civil action against other companies.
Well,
So
Justin,
those are the two routes that we could see shutdowns. But I think in the immediate future, absent those things, we'll continue to see the state markets function as they do today. But the companies will receive a tax break because they'll no longer be subject to 280E. So I do hope that every single consumer who is buying from regulated companies is advocating for those prices to come down, because those companies are going to be seeing 50% tax reduction from what they're currently paying. And I never trust those who are only operating from a capital incentive. So it's going to be incumbent on consumers to demand that those savings be passed on to them. So we're not seeing things like where a certain company in Pennsylvania is charging 3 times as much for the same gram of concentrate that they sell on the California market, just because they have less competition. And so that's one component of it. And then the second component, I imagine, is we'll see a lot more investor dollars flowing in, just because a lot of people will see rescheduling, they'll hear it, they'll think it's a good thing for the industry, so they'll invest either initially or invest more. And so for both of those reasons, consumers should be demanding lower prices through the regulated market in the event of a reclassification. But I also want to take issue with one of the things you said, credit where credit is due. While the Obama administration certainly deserves to be criticized for the DEA and others taking enforcement actions against programs in their first term, in their second, they did issue the Cole Memorandum, which was a guidance memo that said 8 different points, and they instructed all of the federal enforcement agents to not take any action against state legal marijuana programs, adult use or medical, unless they were violating these 8 points. And all those 8 points were pretty rational, as long as the company isn't selling to minors or diverting their products across state lines or things like that. So basically, as long as the companies were in compliance with the state program, the feds were going to leave them alone. So there is a world, and I've been working with a lot of other advocates and congressional offices on starting to build this narrative where given the constraints that HHS self-imposes about their recommendation, given the constraints that the DEA self-imposes about how they're going to respond to the recommendation, the Biden administration can go one step further. And even if we see Reschedule 3 be the final move, it doesn't have to be alone. We could see the Department of Justice issue a new guidance memo that says, okay, despite this rescheduling, we're putting in a new Cole memorandum saying we're not going to take enforcement actions. We could see a laundry list of other policy memos or guidance memos or executive actions, such as, one issue that I think doesn't get talked about enough is marijuana's prohibition and criminalization is one of the leading causes of deportation for undocumented and documented immigrants. So though, even those who are jumping through all those crazy hoops of the current system, if they get caught with a joint and just get issued a civil ticket, that gets marked as a point of bad moral character, and that'll deny them their naturalization or citizenship, or could trigger an outright deportation. It would take a guidance memo at the Department of Homeland Security to say, hey, ICE, who has only been in existence for less than 20 years, ICE, you are not to take enforcement actions for cannabis-related things to trigger that deportation effort. So we could see the administration do a reschedule plus, if you will, and address those things while Congress, which is the cleanest and simplest way to get to descheduling, we continue to build that political will and that political muscle memory, as we did under House Democrats the last two sessions of Congress, pass a bill that would deschedule marijuana.
And immigration is one of those policies that has been so politicized and, to be honestly, racialized.
Yeah.
Because you don't see the kind of restraints of immigrants coming from other countries other than you do from South America and Mexico, which they are falsely being accused of bringing fentanyl into the country right now, whereas actually it's coming from the Far East.
Yeah. And we're seeing more and more reports of it's being brought in by law enforcement agents. For those of you who haven't seen, there's been numerous cases against law enforcement officers, particularly in California, who are running their own criminal enterprises importing Chinese fentanyl to be distributed here in the U.S.
I remember reading that story. There was an entire department in some rural county where everybody was in on it. It was like a Super Troopers parody, damn near.
Oh no, I like to compare it to Denzel Washington in Training Day, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's nuts. Well, Justin, one of the things that concerns me with the Schedule 3 is as we said before, is policing, right? So, what's the penalty for having steroids or morphine or codeine, which are all Schedule 3 drugs, without a prescription?
So the federal penalty for possession of those substances without prescription is the same as possession of marijuana right now. And though on the individual level, right? And we don't often see federal agents being, the boys knocking on your door, coming. That's state and local police. But if state and local police are going to follow the same laws that the feds are empowered to, they still have the legal right to enter your house based on suspicion. So, except for in the 23 states under state law where they don't. So it's my hope that we can have, and this is America, so I know it's probably not going to come true. But it's my hope that as this conversation continues to mature, that we'll stop seeing some of the interests, particularly those who are funded by the multi-state operators, trying to oversell the benefits of rescheduling, but at the same time, empower local, state, and federal advocates and activists to educate policymakers to recognize that, yes, rescheduling is going to be perceived as a step forward, but it does not address the underlying problems and more action is needed at every level of government, so that way we respect the civil rights of people who choose to consume cannabis and those who love them.
Now, the whole concept of having something, a substance which is federally illegal, but legal by various state laws, has created a number of problems, including how things like RICO laws are actually enforced. Now, RICO, for some odd reason, is in the news right now. I'm not exactly certain why, but it's interesting how the federal RICO laws, which were used against mobs and things of that sort, and state laws, which are sometimes broader, like they are in Georgia, have been used primarily to go after cultivators in various states. We had a situation back in the 80s where a gentleman by the name of Donnie Clark over in Manatee County, sorry about that, who was charged with a RICO law because his family was a cultivator, and the family members were out there distributing it. And it was a great product called Mayaka Gold. It was a classic strain here in Florida, and actually one that actually cured somebody of ALS, and that has been verified. But Donnie was the only person who did not flip. He declared himself not guilty. Everybody else flipped on him, his family members, his friends, everybody. None of them went to jail for any more than a couple of months. He got life.
Yeah.
And Clinton actually commuted his sentence just before he left. But and took absolutely everything that Donnie owned. He went from having something like 40 acres of land to basically now he's been living in his girlfriend's house for the last couple of years since he's been out. But do you see anything happening in regards to changes in the RICO laws at all in regards to Schedule 30? And can anything be done retroactively for all those people who are out there?
It's unless the administration chooses to take proactive action to supplement, like I just described, to address resentencing, expungements, vacation of sentences, pardons, etc., then the rescheduling is going to do absolutely nothing for anybody. And under rescheduling, considering that everything that we know as to be state legal is still illegal under federal law, we could still see RICO suits be weaponized against the existing state legal or state unregulated distribution enterprises. You know, it's been a really interesting experience for me as an advocate and having to work alongside and sometimes against, but mostly alongside those who are paid for by the industry, and hearing some of the rhetoric coming out of them, and just thinking to myself, under the eyes of the federal law, you're analogous to a heroin kingpin, and yet, you know, they speak through such, as I like to say, green tinted glasses, that, you know, pretending like they're so star-spangled awesome, and all it would take is an assistant U.S. attorney who wants to get their name in the paper to shut them down and to raid their facilities, to seize all of their assets, to put no trespassing tape or all around their property, and potentially imprison them for the rest of their lives because they are in flagrant violation of federal law. And that's the case under Schedule 1 or Schedule 3. And further, like with the reclassification, we've been in this uneasy détente because marijuana has been Schedule 1 since 1970, and you know, there's just kind of this political and cultural shift. So there's this political pressure against enforcement actions, but under a rescheduling regime, that is the boss, the DEA and the Department of Justice, with you know, the implicit or explicit support of the president, saying, hey, we want you to enforce these laws now. So we could see it spur enforcement like we haven't seen since the first term of the Obama administration prior to the Cole memo.
So Biden, by getting reelected and being a lame duck, essentially will have zero political consequences for legalizing marijuana, essentially. So I mean, but here's the thing: is why? And I have to say this politically. I mean, as political as having been a Democratic delegate, you know, it's like, why aren't you taking a bigger role in that? Like, this is a major issue that could set things apart. Just, be the Uncle Joe that we like and not the crotchety old man, like go ahead and say, I'm going to legalize weed and make it a goddamn platform plank. Have the DNC put it in the party platform. Like, make it a reality. Stop playing, political peekaboo with it.
We live in this political era where there's a really uncomfortable tension, where it was actually it was in the party platform, thanks to largely thanks to the insistence by California Congresswoman Barbara Lee, which, by the way, any viewers, if you're viewing from California, or if you know people in California, strongly encourage you to support Barbara Lee in her Senate bid. As a co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, she's been amazing. She's completely changed the game, and we want to see her in the Senate. But it was actually Biden's political folks who got it removed from the party platform. But at the same time, we're now seeing, I said this earlier, and I'll say it again because I think it's really important. The White House, when they put out their 12 biggest accomplishments from the first 2 years, it includes the marijuana pardons that they announced on October 6th. And the president has spoken about it numerous times since then. They are really championing this. It's part of their plan of how they're going to excite young people to continue to support the party. And yet what they don't say, and what we need to be critical and thoughtful about how we engage, is that pardon only impacted about just over 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
It was so narrowly tailored to only be for simple possession charges.
And that was for federal charges too, right?
And given by federal agents.
Yeah.
So there's very few people who got caught by a Fed for holding a joint. Most times when the federal agents have been involved, it's for distribution, or there's an upgraded charge and they're being stacked. There's a whole issue if a gun was involved, be it a legal or illegal gun.
Yeah.
Our good friend Weldon Angelos got popped and federally incarcerated and had his charges get dramatically scaled up because he had his licensed firearm in his car when he was arrested. He wasn't brandishing it. He wasn't threatening anybody. It was licensed. He bought it legally. But because it was in his car when he got arrested, he got, I think it was 15 extra years attached to it because it automatically becomes a violent crime under U.S. Code 924. So Biden's actions did absolutely nothing to address unstacking charges. And that's why the president and his administration still has a lot of things they can do. And for us, we need to be critical of the things he has yet to do and constructive in supporting them doing more. Because, the only things we've seen presidents do was Nixon start the war on drugs, Reagan escalate the war on drugs, Clinton further escalate the war on drugs with the support of then Judiciary Chairman Senator Joe Biden and the 94 crime bill. And then now Obama with the Cole memo start to turn down the temperature. Trump did nothing, so the temperature still remained low. And now Biden is being proactive in some things, but we shouldn't accept the crumbs. We should demand the whole loaf, and we got a lot more bacon to do.
Justin, when you said,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you said Trump did nothing, I want to be clear because there are some conservatives that love to worship at the altar of Trump for saying, oh, he legalized hemp. But the fact is that the hemp bill was passed by Congress and the president does not have a light item veto. He either had to basically veto the entire farm bill or sign it with the hemp provisions in it. So I just want to make that clear point of that fact when people try to score political points to Trump on weed. I think your assessment of 0 points to Slytherin is correct.
Yeah. And that's, I really want to uplift. At the time, I was the political director at NORML and working with activists around the country, keeping lines of communications over. Whenever Jeff Sessions was doing a public event, we would send out an action alert to people within a 50-mile radius of it. And, usually it was just like 5 people showing up with a sign. And sometimes it was more, sometimes it was only one person. But every single time we sent out an alert saying, hey, Jeff Sessions is speaking here, then somebody from NORML showed up. And that meant every time he had a public appearance throughout the country, then part of the narrative was he's being protested for federal criminalization. And I strongly attribute the Trump administration's Department of Justice under Jeff Sessions, who is one of the most impacted by reefer madness, that and who absolutely hates people who smoke pot with a burning Christian passion, that he didn't take action. And I truly am grateful to all of the activists who would show up and make their voices heard, so that way we kept that drumbeat going to maintain and continue to build our political advantage.
Just to be clear, Jeff Sessions was also the same guy that prosecuted Rosa Parks.
Wait, I missed that memo. I
remember reading.
How have I not been talking shit about him for the last 7 years?
Well, little Jeffrey, who I always consider like the Keebler elf without the hat, also basically had said the Cole memo is officially over now. We don't have to go ahead and go forward. And I was actually praising that for the moment because of that one line where it demands, as one of those 8 points, a robust framework of regulation in each individual state, which created immensely highly regulatory structures in various states that made it very, very difficult, especially in Florida, to move forward. Because they figured, well, the Cole memo gives us permission to create as stringent of a policy as possible. That makes it even worse than any policy against any other Schedule 1 drug or Schedule 2 drug as well.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, what we were talking earlier about RICO, it really does go to show you that being politically connected makes all the difference in the world when operating at the state level. Because if you think about the amount of corruption that has gone into the Florida licensing process and how these original 5 MSOs came about, I mean, even the fact that that one of the MSO's CEO's husband went to jail for bribing city officials and stuff. It's like, where are the RICO charges in Florida? I mean, that's the part that drives me nuts. And then to see that there's also a quid pro quo pay to play scheme in Florida. This past year, we just got off of a major legislative battle in the state capitol, which tried to outlaw Carlos's business and 10,000 other hemp businesses in the state. And if not, outlaw them entirely, was definitely going to crack down on their business models as such as to, try to put them out of business. And we saw that the MSO Trulieve denied being behind it in Florida, but yet by their own hands admitted to being behind it in Maryland and in Arizona and in Virginia. And then you see that Trulieve has donated $75,000 to the PAC that's chaired by the woman who sponsored, to try and outlaw the hemp industry in this state. And the one thing that we can't have, since, as it is, they're behind the adult use amendment in this state, is to happen what happened in Maryland. Like, essentially, when Maryland went adult use on July 1st, every single business like Carlos's had to stop selling their products. Only a licensed adult use dispensaries are allowed to sell Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, whatever novel cannabinoids, any hemp derived products. And that is, to me, going to be another major issue with all of this. Like, the hemp industry was created as a workaround, essentially, because entrepreneurs are smart. People can read the letters of the law. And when hemp was considered, it is an agricultural product. People are selling these agricultural products. And it's like, where does the hemp industry wind up in all of this, Justin? Well, with the Schedule 3, the whole rigmarole.
That is an incredibly good question, and I want to preface the answer by saying the same thing I said at the top. A lot of people out here are selling certainty. I'm selling doubt. We don't know exactly what is going to happen, but some of the things that could happen is we could see the same things I described for the adult use space. All of what is being sold as hemp right now, be it Delta 8, Delta 9, however it is they're calling it, whatever alchemy that they're doing to produce it. I think that we definitely need to be vigilant to make sure that we're not going to see criminalization be inflicted on it. I think that, we're in a moment when we talk about hemp-derived products. It's really a shame that there are some bad actors in the industry who give a really bad impression for all of the sellers, because I've yet to see an independent analysis that showed more than 50% of the products that are being sold as hemp derived products actually be what they purport to be. And I'm saying broad studies, right? So like, Carlos can be there with a good company that's actually, I'm selling something as labeled. But a lot of entities out there, they're selling, things that they advertise as 200 milligrams that maybe contain 20, or they contain, trace elements of metal or things like that. So that actually could see a more like because of that situation, I think the hemp derived industry is actually a much better target for enforcement action, because federal agencies can be able, like, they have all this reporting that they can say, hey, these companies were bad actors, so we're going to go shut it all down. And so if anything, yeah, I think it's the same concerns of the traditional state legal marketplaces and operators, but they, federal agents and U.S. attorneys have that extra receipt that they can use. So if anything, it might be a little bit more at risk.
Carlos, what are your thoughts, man, as the business owner affected by all this?
I mean, I'm concerned for the longevity of the hemp industry, not necessarily because of DEA rescheduling cannabis, but from like a state level. I don't think like you were saying earlier, there's tons of money being pumped into certain legislators in order to pass these laws and get on our business and whatnot. I think, man, I sit here, I listen to you guys, and you guys are going back and forth about Biden trying to reschedule. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, this just seems like a way for Biden to look like he tried to do something, didn't really do anything. I think the DEA loses a lot if they reschedule cannabis. I don't think they have any interest in changing that for themselves. You know what I mean? Like there's too much money, too much funding going into that program in order to handle cannabis, and I don't think they want to lose that.
Yeah, I think under the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Prohibition didn't do any lobbying to make the 16th Amendment kick in that ended prohibition. Because why would they want to lose their jobs? I'm sure the DOJ always wants to make certain they have something to go up against.
Yeah, I think this is a way for Biden to try to look like he's pro cannabis, but really is not doing anything towards anything to fix cannabis reform. And and it's just gonna end there. Like we're this is so complicated that I don't think anybody really wants to touch it, to be honest with you.
Well, not to be too much of a doomsayer, and again, what I'm saying here are things that could happen, not saying that they will happen. And there's a big difference. A lot of people out there are saying this is what is going to happen, and they don't fucking know. Excuse my language, but
you can say anything you fucking want on the show. It's okay.
There is one area, Carlos, I actually disagree with you, just because under a rescheduling regime, DEA, if the FDA chose to take action, it would be in partnership with the DEA. So the DEA could actually claim that they need additional funding to now being able to work better with the FDA, and because everybody is out of compliance with Schedule 3, the DEA could say, hey, we got a lot of work to do, and now we're taking our cues from the FDA. We're taking our cues in favor of promoting public health. So if and the DEA hasn't been doing much on cannabis. They've been doing partnerships with states to go after illicit grows in federal parks and things like that, but they haven't been doing that much, and this actually would give them a lot to do.
Well, what the fuck, Justin?
So sorry, yeah, no.
Who funds the MEP, the Marijuana Elimination Project? Is that the Department of Agriculture?
That is, oh goodness, that is a DOJ program that I remember working on the appropriations amendment offered by California Congressman Ted Lieu to restrict their funding. So if I remember correctly, it's DOJ, but I could be wrong. I feel 85% confident. Let me just do a quick Google.
Well, other than agencies bucking for bigger budgets to validate their existence, which is what cannabis has been at the crux of since its initial prohibition, back in the 30s. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics was an agency looking for a fight in order to validate even existing. And so you're right, the DEA is going to push everything they can to keep a large, robust federal budget. But more than that, I think about the intersection of money and politics, because there are three major index fund managers that play a dominant role in corporate America that own pretty much every major corporation, that own our pensions, that own our 401ks, and that's BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And those three companies also own essentially all the servicing for the prison industrial complex and the private prisons themselves. So that's a major concern as to how those companies play into it, because they're also the same investors that are now in bed with cookies to produce low nicotine cigarettes with I guess CBD in them, or utilizing the cookies brand to try and get people off of a big tobacco's dollars and onto theirs.
Yeah, I don't get some of these interesting actions. I know that the people from Swisher Sweets, I think it was, actually put in money to strengthen up the hemp bill to keep it from being knocked down. And it just amazes me as to where there's the intersection between the corporate and the law come through. It can change practically everything. I was going to ask you this question. We've always said that state legislatures are like the meth lab of democracy. You've heard that before. So the question is, how often does state law influence federal law, and how often does federal law oversee state law after that?
Well,
depends if your shithead governor can get elected. I'm sorry, did I say that out loud?
I mean, I would say that that's the whole principle of the republic, right? Like that we are not a democracy, we are a representative republic, and much of this experiment that is what we think of as our constitutional government is based on that. And one of the scary things to me, as as a political scientist, is that so many people are focused on the nationalization of everything, and when it comes to our politics, and we're spending all this time talking about state level stuff. I know you guys do amazing work focused on Florida, and really at the end of the day, it's going to be whether or not Florida police officers are arresting people, or if it's Florida regulators are shutting down companies, or Florida regulators allowing for additional companies to get licensed. Because I know, in your medical market, you have fewer medical companies than, a single county in the state of Oklahoma. So it's, which is why Florida medical patients are paying higher prices for lower quality cannabis.
We have 22. Only one was still Florida based. Now Planet 13 has bought that license. We have no homegrown. Everybody's a multi-state operator now.
Yeah. So, I think, so my concern when it comes to cannabis, and thank you for that context. I've been using the number 18 for a while. I forgot that they issued a couple more. Is Gary, which states are we talking about influencing the feds? Are we talking about Florida, where it's only 22 companies? Or are we talking about Oklahoma, where it's over 11,000 companies? Or somewhere in the middle, where we can permit those with entrepreneurial spirit to be able to have a chance to get in? Or are we going to continue to have restrictions where only a set number of licenses, and individuals need to have $1 million cash or more to even be able to have the privilege of having their application reviewed for a license?
So what is the chance of some place like Oregon actually having some kind of sway in regards to federal law, and the way that they're handling right now, as I'm sure Carlos is interested in hearing about the psychedelics.
You picked the perfect state for me to answer this question as your example, because Oregon has a terrific congressional delegation who is really representing their constituents in the Congress. And the senior senator of Oregon is Ron Wyden. I know some of you might have met him when we had him as a speaker at the last in-person NORML conference pre-pandemic, where we gave him an award. Who's been absolutely terrific on this, and he is the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, which is arguably one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, Senate committee. So if anything, the Oregon delegation has an outsized amount of influence when it comes to setting federal cannabis policy as we prepare for that end game. And the question is just, how long is it going to take us for us to get to that end game where we can finally have a real pathway to get 60 votes in the US Senate and 218 in the House of Representatives? And I don't know if we're just going till noon, or if you want to go later, I can stick around for a little bit. I do want to pivot and bring up one other thing that we haven't talked about, which is the Safe Banking Act, because it is anticipated that we'll see this year's version of the Safe Banking Act get taken up in the Senate Banking Committee later this month. Now, mind you, we have had a false start earlier this year, where back in July we were like, all right, it's going to be this month.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple senators expressed some last minute problems, and we had to go through the rigmarole. All signs point to we're coming up later this month for a markup. And should Senator Daines, the Republican of Montana, who is the lead Republican on that bill, follow through on his commitment that he has made to Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, the Democratic leader of that bill, and deliver more than 10 Republican votes for that final package, for the first time in U.S. history, we'll have 10 plus Republicans on record to liberalize cannabis policy in this country. So I think that sets the stage for the end game for when we get to a comprehensive bill to address the underlying prohibition.
Justin, we got 3 adult use states.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the numbers. Is there 10 Republicans from the 23 adult use states that we could lean on?
Absolutely not. There is, looking at the map of the U.S., there is a whopping 1, which is Senator Daines in Montana, and no other Republicans representing adult use states.
You got a list of Republicans on your wall?
No, I just have a map of the country, and I just know who represents what.
So we got to get Jamie Raskin into the Senate, right?
Jamie Raskin would be great. Is he running? I didn't know that.
No, he's not running for senator. He's going to stay in his congressional seat.
Yeah, no.
I think the leading candidate right now for the Senate is Angela Alsobrooks, who is the chief executive of Prince George's County. She's a county exec. She seems to, I would say, have a lot of establishment credentials. I mean, I was just at Steiny Hoyer's fundraiser on Friday, and she was there getting props and such. So we could have a black woman in the Senate from Maryland, and we could have one from California, which would that would be historic over this next election cycle.
And we do have some good candidates in Florida to try to defeat Earthworm Rick.
That is true. Yeah, there's Debbie Murkowski Powell out of South Florida, who's a former congresswoman, and then there's Phil who's a veteran out of North Florida who had ran for Congress against Matt Gaetz, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to get out of CD1.
There's Carlos Trinita in Ybor City, who's going to run for mayor.
I'm on Carlos's team. So, well, this is we're all hopeful, right? We're all optimistic. Justin, if safe banking makes it through the Senate, does it got to go to the House, and can we get it passed in a Republican-led House?
Well, that is going to be a thing that we find out together. I would say, having been really involved in negotiating what I like to, we normally just say safe banking or we say safe plus. I like to remind people it's the modified Safe Banking Act because it's been expanded since it had previously passed in the House to also include CDFIs or Consumer Financial Depository Institutions who provide more than 50% of services to small businesses. The previous version did not include CDFIs. So that's going to be really helpful. It makes the bill much better for small businesses. And the bill has been included or expanded to include mortgage protections for those who work in the cannabis industry. What some of you may know, and Chris, I know you know well, is that most of those who work in the cannabis industry, if they want to buy a house, they go to their bank. The bank is going to deny them a mortgage application because of their source of income verification, and their source of income is illegal under federal law, and your mortgage just isn't worth taking on that federal risk. So the bill has been expanded to include that, and that's thanks to Senate Banking Chairman Sherrod Brown. I know that many in the cannabis reform community are frustrated that Senator Brown hasn't taken it up sooner, and I understand that frustration. And as a native from Ohio, I share that frustration. But I think as long as we can actually get it done this year, then we go to the House, and it would be easier if it wasn't such a contentious election year next year. But all the more reason when you have groups like NORML and the American Bankers Association on the same team. We've demonstrated that political coalition can win over a dozen times in the House already. So if the Senate moves first, already a majority of Republicans who had voted on it in the past, 51% voted yes for the bill last year. So we're hoping to be able to get them to be comfortable saying yes to the bankers one more time.
Now, I wouldn't say that the cannabis companies out there will actually pass any savings on to the consumer. Mm-hmm. But is it possible that the modified SAFE Act will also dissolve the 408E restrictions in regards to deductions for all the expenses that they have?
Oh, it's not going to be expanded to include 280E. The negotiations for what is in the modified SAFE Plus, which is the introduced bill as we see it on Congress.gov right now today, which has those expansions I just talked about. And then the plan is on the way to the Senate floor, they're going to attach the Bipartisan Hope Act, or Harnessing Opportunities by Pursuing Expungements, which is, entirely inadequate to truly address expungements. It would only be $2 million a year through grants of the Department of Justice, but it would empower all of you and everyone viewing this to go and push their city councils, county councils, and state governments, saying there is a grant fund to support expungement programs. So states and localities can apply for a piece of that money. So it'd be $2 million a year for 10 years, so only $20 million in general. But to put that in context of how much that can support people, Oregon has the best data we have for cost per expungement in a mass expungement regime, and it was $27 per expungement. So $20 million is over 740,000 expungements. That's nearly 750,000 people who'd be much better off if we got the Hope Act than we didn't.
What is the actual cost right now on the average per state, or is it just state by state in regards to expungements?
I like to just point at Oregon because that's where we have, in my view, the best, most concrete data. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes municipalities like to, it's funny money to them, and they like to inflate the cost per, so that way they can justify a bigger appropriation or less money for something else. So that's the number I like to stick to. But I've seen estimates ranging from $10 to $77.
Yeah, I've in Florida, if I recall, it was like around about $75 to do all the paperwork for the expungement.
Yeah.
So I mean, Gary, that's to your point, when originally Justin said 2 million for the whole country, I divided it by that's only 40 grand for each state. But again, some states have 20 million people like Florida, and some states, have like Rhode Island aren't going to need that many. And then some states already at the state level are doing this.
Already did it. Yep. Like we don't have to worry about California because they already did it. We don't have to worry about Oregon. They already did it.
I always worry about California.
No, I still California is a whole special case, but no, I think that it would mean a lot. So yeah, the idea is move SAFE out of the committee, and then on the floor of the Senate in order to satisfy and I'm simultaneously. I know a lot of people were frustrated with Senator Booker saying he's not going to support SAFE by itself. I understand why they're frustrated, but I don't agree with it. I think his rationale, if we're gonna address cannabis reform at all, we cannot only provide criminal protections to bankers and do absolutely nothing for people. So thanks to Senator Booker's leadership, we're going to be able to add the HOPE Act. Senator Daines has already whipped the Republicans to make sure that we're going to have the votes to get that attached. There is a possibility that we're going to also attach what's known as the Graham Act, or the Gun Rights and Marijuana Act, which I know you guys in Florida, given former agricultural commissioner, now Democratic Party head Nikki Fried, her lawsuit against the Biden administration within the gun rights on and marijuana patients. If we can address that as well, so as a 3-bill package, move that whole thing. In the House of Representatives, the package would be carried by Republican Representative Dave Joyce, who, as a Republican from Ohio, he is the head of what's known as the Governance Group, which is like the moderate Republicans caucus. And he was instrumental in supporting Kevin McCarthy in all of those rounds of votes earlier this year, and making sure that he actually got, the speakership. So this is an issue that Congressman Joyce has really focused on. He is one of the most sincere Republicans, hardworking on marijuana policy reform. And thanks to his leadership, that's why we have a shot in the Republican House.
So we're going to have a bill.
It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard, but I think the royal we, as long as we don't change the deal is baked. It's fully baked. And, unfortunately, some of the lobbyists representing the multi-state operators are tenaciously trying to expand the bill and they're being, in my view, very deceitful in how they're trying to do it. They're saying it's a definitional change, but they're trying to change some definitions for the purposes of Wall Street and investors to piggyback off of the descheduled nature of hemp, which would allow marijuana companies to get listed on American stock exchanges. And they're doing it because they want to get even more money. And I understand that. Yeah. I don't think it's appropriate for this narrow of a bill that took this much effort to get to a place where if they get that definitional change, our coalition in support of this bill falls apart. And we're not going to be able to get it past both chambers. And Republicans in the House have explicitly told these lobbyists who are representing some of the MSOs that they will not consider the bill if it includes that, and yet they're still pushing really hard. So I'm that's my biggest concern right now is the fact that we do have a lot of the industry not working in good faith or in solidarity with the movement and purely looking out for their own bottom line in this quarterly capitalist system that they're responding to shareholders.
Well, it feels like the MSOs have been operating on like a pyramid scheme funding, trying to hedge their bets that they're going to win. And then the floodgates would come in. But now that every time we hit a roadblock, either politically or an election comes up and it slows things down, they're burning through their investors' money faster than they can actually make any returns.
Yeah,
faster than Adam Behrman.
It's hard. How can anybody say that this is like a bipartisan? It's hard for me to see conservatives doing anything like good for cannabis reform.
Yeah,
it's how can anybody say this is a bipartisan issue? I mean, the only time I see a conservative wanting cannabis reform is when they can make money off of it.
I think there are a handful of Republicans who I think in good faith actually are supportive of reform. But when this is why earlier when I was talking about the coalition that has been established that includes from NORML to the American Bankers Association, right?
Yeah.
And we would not be talking about how SAFE has passed more than a dozen times if not for the American Bankers Association. I know that a lot of the multi-state operators and industry lobbyists like to claim credit for it. I mean, hell, I claim partial credit for it because I was one of the lobbyists working on it, and for longer than almost everybody who's still in the game. But if I had to attribute who gets the most credit, it's the ABA, because they want to be able to engage with the tens of thousands of companies that have been sprung up all around the country and get that money. So they want to get all of that cash that's sitting out in vaults all around the country. They want to put that because that is better for their liquidity structures. If they can get that cold hard cash in their system.
And one more question I wanted to ask you. I know we got to get going here, but is there going to be any kind of federal shoring up of the Farm Act that will prevent any kind of issue like we're having over here in Florida, where they're trying to shut down all the hemp dealers that are dealing with the novel cannabinoids from hemp?
Well, this is going to be a disappointing answer, but I wouldn't bet on it. I think that there, everything is possible, right? I was having a conversation literally the Wednesday before last at 10 a.m. saying, we have no idea how long it's going to take for HHS to move forward. It could take another 6 to 12 months. And then 3 hours later is when the letter letter leak went public, right? So when we're operating, nothing is going to happen until it does. I know that a number of offices have been working diligently. I talked about Senator Wyden earlier as the chair of the Finance Committee. A lot of people attribute Mitch McConnell for getting the Farm Bill to include descheduling hemp the first time, and he was the most responsible. The second most responsible member of the Senate was Ron Wyden. And I know it's something his office is taking very seriously and trying to get done. But I think that I don't see it percolating as of yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see momentum shift in the next couple of weeks. But given the upcoming government shutdown as well, that's why I wouldn't bet on it, right? Like, just because all eyes are on the appropriations process, and it's going to be a real shit show.
Well, I want to thank you for dropping the S word, or the SD word, as it were, because that always seems to be a very powerful motivator for so many to actually flip on a lot of previous positions. But we want to thank you for all the hard work you're doing over there in the Beltway. And where can people get a hold of you or support your PAC?
Right. Thank you again for having me back on the rotation. It's always a blast. And just all the good work you guys do to elevate the conversation. For those interested in continuing to follow what I'm up to and support my efforts, you can follow the Bull Pack PAC on Twitter. Go to our website at thebullpack.org. You can also follow me personally at Justin Strekal. I do a lot of my cannabis reform efforts on Twitter. I just find it's the easiest.
We're talking X now, right?
Open. No, I'm not calling it X. I'm still calling it Twitter. I'm done. But I'm open to being convinced that I should switch to a different media platform. I really hope, with the Bull Pack, we often do action alerts on federal efforts, both on cannabis, and one of the things that my PAC explores is the intersection between cannabis policy and other aspects of American public policy. So if you're curious to hear all that and more, sign up at thebullpack.org.
Awesome. I find it ironic. Baby boomers refuse to call Muhammad Ali refuse to call Cassius Clay Muhammad Ali, and millennials refuse to call Twitter X.
I'm still working on Llewellyn Sindor.
I really, at this point, I want to get off, but I just started enjoying using it like 6 months before Musk bought it. And I've yet to determine that there's another more public commons that's as relevant as it is yet.
You're not going to Facebook threads yet.
Like threads could be it. I have an account there, but I don't, it's just I don't want to have to post the same thing in 7 different places. I'd rather just do one. But who knows? Maybe if any of your listeners want, really think that I should be everywhere, you can make a generous contribution to the Bull Pack, and we'll hire somebody to do social media, so I can continue to focus my time on the advocacy components.
There you go.
I just being, we got a small team at the Bull Pack, and I just don't want to waste my time posting on 8 different sites right now.
I hear Parler's looking for content.
Yeah. What's that?
I heard Parler's looking for content, right?
Well,
they're popping up all over the damn place.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's time for the news.
Thanks again, guys.
All right. Well, look, coming to you, recent analysis coming out of the Journal of Cannabis Research in Ottawa, Canada, shows that unregulated cannabis products are far more likely to contain pesticides. Researchers affiliated with Health Canada analyzed samples of cannabis flower obtained from the legal and unregulated markets. Canada legalized adult use back in 2018 for reference. They reported only 6% of samples obtained from licensed marketplace contain trace amounts of pesticide residues. By contrast, 92% of unregulated flower products tested positive for the residual presence of pesticides. And so the pesticides detected in 92% of Canada's illicit cannabis inflorescence samples with 23 unique pesticide active ingredients quantified. Basically, if you're a legacy market grower, flush your cannabis, please. There's nothing worse than having extra newts and chemicals in your thing. It makes for a bad smoke. And it also ends up with these studies giving more validation for government regulation of this product, which, as we said, the government has seemed to have screwed the pooch when it comes to cannabis for the past essentially century. Now, interesting enough, cannabis has its medical value. We talked about it with the DEA judge, back in the 80s, asserting it has medical value. And a survey, which data was published in Supportive Care in Cancer, showed that nearly 1/3 of cancer patients acknowledge utilizing cannabis post-diagnosis, and most do not tell their doctor. Only 1 in 4 consumers discuss their cannabis use with their healthcare providers, a result that is consistent with other studies finding that most patients are reluctant to speak to their doctors about cannabis-specific health issues. This stigma, speaking to your doctor about it, also, goes back to the fact that people don't necessarily want that on their charts or used against them with an insurance company. Also thinking about the federal illegality of cannabis and how many senior citizens, how many people are on Medicare or government-funded health insurance. And that's just going to be another political football that's going to be used in the future against folks. Is why are the tax dollars going to all of these potheads, right? And that's always going to be a major concern.
Because the prices are too high. That's why.
Now let's look at the fact that we see the political football of children always being utilized between conservatives and liberals in the modern era. And one of the things that comes is an analysis which was published in the journal Addiction Medicine that show that court-mandated marijuana treatment admissions for young people declined significantly following legalization. A team of researchers at Temple University in Philadelphia analyzed 10 years from 2008 to 2019 of admissions data from the U.S. government's TEDS, treatment episode data sets. They reported that the total number of marijuana-related drug treatment admissions declined significantly among adolescents aged 12 to 17 and young adults 18 to 24 during this time period. Much of this decline is the result of fewer court-mandated admissions, which I've always said, the crazy part is people say marijuana is addictive. but 80% of people in rehab for marijuana are there because the court said they need to be there, or that was the only way to get their charges expunged, was to go through the rehab industrial complex. And when I say rehab industrial complex, as someone who's had actually been through that system, I can tell you it is specifically designed not to treat you and get you well, but to fleece you for a ridiculous amount of money by putting your freedom at risk. And that's just not right. Now, looking at what's talking about myths and everything that's going on, I think it's time that we dispel the myth that cannabis smoke and tobacco smoke are equally hazardous to their health. Many Americans wrongly believe exposure to marijuana smoke is safer than tobacco, is what CNN has been screaming. But the fact is that CNN is reporting a lot of sensational news these days. Numerous studies have long asserted the long-term health impacts of cannabis smoke exposure, and to dispel the myth that marijuana is associated with the same adverse respiratory hazards as tobacco. For example, federally funded research performed by scientists at the University of California in Los Angeles compared the lifetime risk of lung cancer among more than 2,000 long-term marijuana smokers, tobacco smokers, and non-smokers. Investigators determined those who regularly smoke cigarettes possessed a 20-fold higher lung cancer risk than non-smokers. And by contrast, those who only smoke marijuana possess no such elevated risk. Another longitudinal study led by researchers at Colorado School of Public Health assessed that the relationship between lifetime marijuana use and respiratory function in a cohort of 2,300 subjects between the ages of 40 and 80 concluded that current and former marijuana smokers had significantly higher forced expiratory volume when compared to never users. Both current and former marijuana use was associated with significantly less quantitative emphysema when compared to never users. In agreement with other published studies, we did not find that marijuana use was associated with more obstructive lung disease. Look, plain and simple, tobacco smoke is bad for you. Weed smoke is not as bad as tobacco smoke. And if we're coming with, a synopsis of today's show, it's that cannabis needs to be descheduled. The rescheduling is still going to cause a number of other issues. It seems to be that rescheduling is being pushed by a small minority in the advocacy movement that are essentially being fronted by multi-state operators, by big pharma that want to get a hold of this beneficial product. The fact is that there is a natural occurring plant, God-given plant if you're a religious person, that shows that it has more medicinal value and industrial value to humankind for the past 12,000 years. And for the past 80 some years, the existence of the United States federal government and the overreach of the bureaucracy and federal agencies have really infringed on our civil rights, have created this system to where one of the most beneficial plants that we've had in human civilization is now denied to us. And it's used as a revenue generating scheme in its prohibition. And even as we declassify it and deprohibit it, it's still being used as a revenue generating scheme. And all things goes back to the corruption of money and politics. And so elections matter. And so that's why we at NORML are a civil rights lobby at our core. We're going to continue to push at the state level in Florida for your civil rights to be protected. We're going to continue to push to make sure that your right as a parent is protected, that you don't lose your kids for utilizing cannabis, that you're not kicked off the organ transplant list for utilizing cannabis, that your mother or your grandmother is not kicked out of their nursing home because they want to utilize cannabis to live a healthy lifestyle. The fact is that you shouldn't lose your job or be precluded from a job because you utilize cannabis. And we're going to continue to advocate for that and continue to advocate for public protections for folks. And we can't do that without you. The fact is we talked about it today. There are major multi-state operators in Florida that are giving tens of thousands of dollars to corrupt politicians to directly attack the legal hemp industry, to make sure that they can get a corner on the market, on the legal cannabis industry, and that they can continue to sell you overpriced, under quality booth and deny your right to home cultivation and to quality cannabis. And if that pisses you off, then it's time to take action. And we need you We need to build an army of cannabis activists across the state of Florida, and we need to increase our numbers across this country. And you can do that becoming a member of NORML. Join Suncoast NORML today for $25 a year. I could give you the whole.
That's $25.
$25. That's it. That's less than $2, a little over $2 a month.
That's how I could support something. That's nothing.
Give a little more than $2 a month. Okay, it's like 60 cents a week. For 60 cents a week, for 10 cents a day, you can support cannabis legalization in this state, in this country, at the local, state, and federal levels. All your dues money goes into our advocacy and education programs. We don't get paid to do this. As much as I know my car needs some repairs, I know Gary's van needs some repairs. Carlos, he loves the environment. He's self-efficient. He drives a small, efficient car. Point being is, look, we are here to make sure that we accomplish the mission of legalizing it and protecting your civil rights as a cannabis consumer. And we cannot do that without you. So, even if you yourself are already a member, or maybe you're a dues paying member who's lapsed, sign back up, sign your dues. If you're already a member, buy a normal membership for a family member for their birthday or for Christmas. It's the gift that keeps on giving year round. And so we need
the next time somebody calls you up at your house and asks you to give $25 to the Fraternal Order Police, say, sorry, I already tagged my money to go to Suncoast NORML.
I love it. I love it.
Documentary, that telemarketing documentary.
Oh, that was killer.
It was really good.
Well, again, team, thank you so much. Gary, thank you for being an amazing political director and bringing on such awesome guests as Justin. Carlos, thank you again for giving Suncoast NORML a home there at Chillum and designing the studio and running things as our engineer. This organization would not be as successful without the amazing people like yourselves. And I want to give a shout out to our other board members, our finance officer and finance director Tiffany, our communications director Kelly, our director Carla, our membership director Steve. Those ladies and you gentlemen have continued to push this organization. And we are get better and better every single year. And again, we need you, the members, the average folks, to get out there. Go to suncoastnormal.org. There's elections coming up. We've already made some endorsements in the special elections here in Florida. We're going to be making endorsements in 2024. And, will remain to be seen what happens with adult use in our state, depending on how the Supreme Court comes down on these different ballot amendments and such. But the fact is that we cannot do this without you. So again, join Suncoast NORML today, and let's make it happen. Let's win. Let's legalize.
Let's have your name added to this list by next week. And we also got good gifts for anybody who go ahead and gives up at $25. You get that special pin for your lapel. You get a discount over at Chillum in both locations, both in Ybor City and St. Petersburg, correct?
Yeah, both locations. I'm sorry.
And just a program note, next week we're going to have on Andy D'Angelo, the co-founder of Harborside over in California, and also the co-president of the Last Prisoner Project. So we look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, fight the fight. Go to our site. Check out the bills we got going. Pick one. Go to your legislative delegation and push them. And we will see you next week, guys.